I never expected my love for my son to one day become my greatest source of pain. I used to believe that if I poured enough of myself into him, every ounce of care, every drop of sacrifice, he'd carry that love in his heart forever. But what I didn't realize was that sometimes, the more you give, the more invisible you become. Daniel was everything to me. I raised him alone after my husband passed away in a car accident when Daniel was only 5. We had just celebrated his birthday the week before. Balloons still drooped sadly in the corner when I received the call from the hospital. I didn't get to grieve properly. I had a child to raise and a whole world to rebuild. I worked double shifts, sometimes triple, waitressing during the day, cleaning offices at night. I missed sleep, skipped meals, and never once complained, because Daniel was always worth it. I remember standing outside his private school, my apron still damp with dishwater, watching him walk out with the other boys in their blazers and polished shoes. He didn't know I was there most days. I made sure of it. I wanted him to feel normal, even if my hands were calloused and my back ached from hours of scrubbing floors. When he got into university, I sold the little jewelry I had left to help with his tuition. I skipped dentist appointments. I never bought new clothes. I haven't traveled more than 30 miles outside this city in decades. But I told myself, one day he'll understand. He'll look at me with pride. And for a while, I thought maybe that day was close. He met Marissa at a corporate event. She was elegant, poised, with a laugh like glass wind chimes. She worked in public relations for a high-profile firm. And from the moment she entered Daniel's life, it was like watching him step into a different world, her world. One of gallery openings, wine tastings, polished words and unspoken rules. I was happy for him, truly. He looked smitten, and I wanted him to have the love I'd lost too early. The first time Marissa came to dinner at my home, I made my signature roast chicken and lemon pie. I wore my nicest blouse, the one with the stitched roses. She barely touched her plate and smiled thinly. So quaint, she had said. It reminds me of my grandmother's house. I laughed politely, though something stung. It's very warm, she added, in a vintage way. From then on, the invitations to her events stopped coming my way. When Daniel hosted dinners, I was either told last minute or not at all. It's just work people, he'd say. Not really your scene. I didn't push. I told myself it was just the adjustment period. A young couple figuring out their space. Then came the engagement. Daniel told me they were keeping the wedding small, just family and close friends. I nodded, even though I'd secretly started sewing pearls onto a soft blue dress I'd saved for years for a special occasion. I booked a salon appointment, dyed my grays, even bought a modest clutch purse. A week before the ceremony, I visited their apartment with a small cake and a framed photo of Daniel as a child, hoping they'd use it at the reception. Marissa was on the phone when I arrived, pacing in her heels. She looked annoyed but forced a smile. Daniel's not back yet, she said coolly. But you can wait. I sat quietly in the pristine white living room, hands in my lap. When Daniel returned, he looked tense. He avoided my eyes. Mom, he started, his voice low. We need to talk. I straightened in my seat. Of course, sweetheart. What is it? Marissa joined him, standing just behind his shoulder, her arms crossed like she was delivering a quarterly report. It's about the wedding, she said. We've made some changes. I nodded, uncertain. Okay. Should I call the florist? Or? She smiled tightly. No, it's the guest list. We had to downsize further. Daniel shifted awkwardly beside her. Truthfully, she went on, we're going for a very specific aesthetic. Clean lines. Contemporary elegance. And your presence, it might not align with the tone. I blinked slowly, her words circling my head like cold wind. I'm sorry. Daniel finally met my eyes just briefly. Mom, it's not personal. You can still watch the live stream. I felt something cave quietly inside me, like a shelf giving way after holding weight for too long. I stood slowly. So you're uninviting me? Marissa's smile didn't waver. It's just simpler this way. Daniel didn't speak. He didn't stop her. He just looked at the floor. I reached for my purse, smoothing down the fabric of the dress I had brought to show them. Of course. I understand. And I did. Oh, I understood more than they realized. As I walked toward the door, I paused and turned to face them. My son, standing quietly behind a woman who had decided I was too much of an eyesore for her perfect day. I hope the live stream has good audio, I said softly. I wouldn't want to miss a single vow. Then I walked out the door with my back straight, and my heart cracking silently inside my chest. But not broken. Not this time. Because now, I was done begging to be loved. I sat at my kitchen table, tracing the rim of my teacup, the silence of the house pressing in around me. In the corner of the room, the soft blue dress I'd planned to wear to Daniel's wedding hung untouched on a coat rack, tags still fluttering faintly from the sleeve. I couldn't bring myself to put it away. Not yet. That night I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't even eat. I simply sat there, listening to the sound of the old wall clock ticking away, as if mocking the time I'd wasted on people who now wanted me out of sight. I thought about all the years behind me, about how I gave Daniel everything. I paid his tuition when he got into that elite private school, even when I had to skip meals. I sold my wedding bangles to buy him his first car, just so he wouldn't feel less than his classmates. And when Marissa's business was on the verge of collapse during that tech scandal 2 years ago, it was my savings she used to keep her firm afloat. I'd wired her $50,000 without hesitation. Just until the press dies down, she had said, voice shaking over the phone. Please, Helen. I can't go to my parents. And I hadn't even asked for it back. I could have called them that night, told them off, demanded an apology, respect, acknowledgement, anything. But what would that change? Marissa would blink her cold, cat-like eyes and say something cutting in that saccharine tone of hers. And Daniel, he'd stand behind her like he always did, silent, weak, apologetic only when no one else was around. No, I didn't want an apology. I wanted to be remembered. That's when the idea took root. Not out of revenge. Not exactly. But out of the desire to reclaim a piece of myself they had tried to erase. I went into my bedroom, opened the second drawer of my nightstand, and pulled out a thin envelope wrapped in silk ribbon. Inside were documents, notarized and sealed, my inheritance from the man I once cared for like family, Mr. Elias Lancaster, a titan in the real estate world. To the public, he was just another mogul. But to me, he was a lonely old man who called me his only friend during his final years. I had been his living caregiver after his stroke. I read to him when his eyesight dimmed. I played jazz records when he couldn't sleep. I held his hand the night he passed, while his own children were halfway across the world managing his empire. 5 years ago, his attorney had arrived at my cottage with the will. To Helen Dawson, the man had read aloud, adjusting his glasses, for her unwavering kindness, loyalty, and dignity, I leave my gratitude and a financial gift of $6.2 million. I hadn't touched most of it. I still lived in my old cottage, drove my dusty sedan, clipped coupons for groceries. Not because I needed to, but because I didn't know how to be any other way. But tonight, for the first time I reached for the money. I turned on my old laptop and searched the venue Marissa had gushed about during her engagement dinner. Roseberry Estate, I whispered aloud, staring at the photos on the screen. Of course it would be that one. Marble staircases, gilded chandeliers, a lakeside gazebo framed by imported rose gardens. Marissa had bragged about booking it 9 months in advance, and how exclusive it was. Only high-profile clientele, Helen. They even turned down a local senator once. My eyes narrowed slightly. Let's see if they turn me down too. I picked up the phone and dialed the number listed on the website. Roseberry Estate, this is Callum speaking. How can I assist you? Yes, good evening, I said calmly. I'd like to discuss the purchase of the entire venue. Not a rental. I'm interested in acquiring the estate itself. There was a pause, then a cough. I'm sorry, did you mean to buy the Roseberry Estate? That's correct. I'm prepared to offer twice the asking price. I'd like to proceed through a silent partnership for now. You'll be working with my representative. Another long pause. Then in a more alert voice. Yes, of course, ma'am. We can absolutely set up a private consultation. Good. And Callum? Yes. I understand there's a wedding booked for next Saturday. I want all current bookings honored. Especially that one. The couple's names are Marissa Kingsley and Daniel Dawson. He hesitated. Yes, that file is on our schedule. I want you to keep everything as is. Let the bride continue to believe everything's proceeding normally. But from this point on, I want full control over event access layout, guest admission, presentation order, everything. You'll receive a new schedule and instructions from my assistant tomorrow morning. Yes, of course. Will the couple be informed? No, I said firmly. Not until the moment matters most. As I ended the call, I felt something shift inside me. Not spite, not anger, but a strange, quiet clarity. They had tried to exclude me, like a blemish on their perfect day. But I had no intention of being erased. I didn't want a seat at their table. I would own the table. And when the music started and the lights turned on, everyone in that room would remember exactly who I was. Not just Daniel's mother, but the woman who gave him everything. And then, without ever raising her voice, took it all back. The morning of the wedding arrived with a pale sky and a whispering breeze. I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing down the soft folds of my dove-gray gown. It wasn't flashy. No sequins. No rhinestones. Just quiet elegance. Much like the woman I'd become. My hair was pinned up neatly, a soft silver twist above a face that held lines of both love and betrayal. I slipped on my earrings, modest pearls Daniel had given me on his college graduation day. I doubted he remembered. I arrived at Roseberry Estate 2 hours early, just as the florists were placing the final arrangements on the arched trellis. A staff member glanced at me politely and gave a nod, likely mistaking me for a senior guest, or perhaps a quiet sponsor. I didn't correct her. I didn't need to. There was no need to announce myself when the truth would speak soon enough. The place was exquisite. Marissa's touch was everywhere: calligraphy signs, pastel rose petals scattered down the aisle, signature cocktails with little gold tags tied to each glass. Everything screamed curated perfection. And there I was, a ghost drifting quietly through it all, watching. I found a seat at the back of the garden rows. No one paid me any mind. Guests in satin dresses and tailored suits filed in, murmuring pleasantries. The photographer hovered near the front, lenses flashing. Social media was already buzzing. I caught snippets of conversation about the exclusive wedding of the season. Then the music swelled. Marissa appeared at the top of the aisle, like she was descending from heaven itself. The guests collectively gasped. She wore a gown so white it seemed almost deliberately defiant, with a veil trailing behind her like mist. Her smile was slow, confident, smug even. Daniel stood waiting, a bit pale, but smiling as if the day were his own coronation. My son. The boy I once carried on my hip through thunderstorms and scraped knees. The boy I raised on rice, boiled eggs, and bedtime stories. He stood there now in a $1,000 tuxedo, his eyes fixed on a woman who thought I wasn't good enough to be seen. The ceremony went by in a blur of vows, rings, and forced laughter. I stayed silent, still, almost invisible in my back row seat. But the fire inside me didn't flicker. It burned steadily, quiet and sure. After the ceremony, guests moved into the reception hall, a ballroom drenched in golden light and dripping with crystal chandeliers. Waiters passed hors d'oeuvres and champagne, as Marissa floated from table to table like royalty. Daniel followed dutifully, smiling, nodding, his hand barely leaving her waist. I slipped in unnoticed, settling into a chair near the back corner of the room. I watched as the MC, a man in a sharp navy blazer and a slightly too wide grin, stepped onto the small stage beside the cake. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed cheerfully, "we have something special prepared by the bride and groom." A little look back at their journey. He gestured toward the screen behind him as the lights dimmed. I took a deep breath and folded my hands in my lap. The screen flickered, then faded into black. A single photo appeared. Daniel at 2 years old, chubby cheeks, wide eyes, sitting in a high chair with spaghetti smeared across his face. My hands were in the frame too, holding a spoon. The crowd laughed softly. Another image. Daniel asleep on my chest, maybe 4 or 5. His face peaceful while I rested against an old armchair. Then his middle school graduation. I was in the front row clapping, tears in my eyes. His first car, rusty old but new to him. A photo of me holding the keys out with a proud grin. Soft piano music played underneath. Then captions began to appear. The woman who stood behind him every step of the way. The one who never missed a parent-teacher meeting. The one who stayed up nights so he could sleep peacefully. Gasps filled the room. Whispers. A few people turned, scanning the crowd. Then came video footage. Daniel at his university ceremony, hugging me tightly. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom," he had said. It played on the speakers now, echoing across the glittering room. I stood. Slowly, I made my way to the stage. All eyes turned. The MC looked uncertain, stepping back. I climbed the 2 small stairs and faced the crowd, gently taking the microphone. "I'm sorry for the interruption," I said, my voice clear but calm. "I wasn't supposed to be here today. In fact, I was asked not to come. I was told I didn't fit the aesthetic." A few murmurs swept through the room, but I decided to come anyway, quietly, gracefully, and I brought a few memories with me, because while I wasn't good enough to attend this wedding, I thought perhaps you all deserved to know who stood behind this perfect couple when the cameras weren't around. My eyes drifted to Marissa. She had gone white as her dress. Her mouth was pressed into a hard line. Then I looked at Daniel. His eyes were wide, frozen, a kind of panic resting behind them. "I hosted this event," I continued. "Every petal, every chandelier, every cocktail you're sipping, I paid for it. I bought Roseberry Estate 3 days ago. And I told the staff to let the show go on. Because I didn't want to ruin your day, Marissa. I just wanted to reclaim mine." Gasps. Hands covered mouths. Phones began recording. The room was no longer celebratory. It was reverent, like witnessing a reckoning. Marissa stormed toward the stage. "Shut it off," she shouted. "Shut it down right now." Callum, the venue manager, stepped forward from the side, his expression measured. "I'm afraid we can't do that, ma'am." "Why not?" He turned to her and said clearly, "Because she's the owner now. And she has final say." Silence. A silence so full you could feel it pressing against the walls. I handed the mic back to the MC and walked down the stage, my steps measured, my face serene. I didn't look back at Daniel. I didn't need to. I had already said everything I needed to. This wasn't revenge. This was the truth, finally stepping into the light. And it was mine to tell. The laughter and clinking glasses behind me grew faint as I stepped through the tall doors of the Roseberry Ballroom, heels clicking softly on the marble as I walked into the evening air. I didn't linger. I didn't gloat. I didn't even turn back. Not because I was defeated, but because there was nothing left to prove. Let them continue their celebration if they could. Let Marissa scramble to fix the cracks in her porcelain-perfect world. I had said my piece. I had shown the truth. And I had done it with the same quiet dignity I'd raised my son with. I returned to my cottage that night with a calm I hadn't felt in years. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, wrapped my shawl around my shoulders, and sat by the window, watching the stars blink softly above the trees. Goofy would have curled beside me if he were still here. I whispered a thank you to the universe anyway. For strength. For clarity. For finally letting me reclaim my name. The next few days unfolded with the sharpness of karmic precision. It started with a single blog post. Then came the storm. Someone had filmed my speech, of course they had, and uploaded it. The caption read, "She wasn't even invited to her own son's wedding. So she bought the venue and told her story." The video went viral overnight. By morning, Marissa's PR accounts were in full damage control mode. But it was too late. Commenters flooded her brand's pages. "This is the woman who told her husband's mother to stay home. You really think a wedding aesthetic matters more than the woman who raised your groom? I used to admire you, Marissa. Now all I see is cruelty dressed in white." Sponsorships vanished. A popular bridal magazine pulled her feature. Boutique brands she had endorsed posted quiet statements cutting ties. Her empire, built on image, began to fracture under the weight of something stronger than spin, truth. And Daniel, well, he took longer. He always did. 3 days later, I heard a knock at my front door. I opened it slowly. There he stood, Daniel. My son. Hair messy, suit jacket wrinkled, tie hanging loose like he'd pulled it off halfway through some frantic car ride. He looked tired. Ashamed. "Mom," he said, voice low, eyes full. I said nothing. Just waited. He cleared his throat, then looked down at his hands like he was searching for the right words there. I came to say I'm sorry. I studied him. unsure if it was guilt or just the sting of public embarrassment. I didn't know she'd say that to you, he said. About not coming. I should have stopped her. I should have said something. I stepped outside, gently closing the door behind me, resting against it. But you didn't, I said softly. He winced. I was trying to keep the peace. You know how Marissa gets when she's stressed. I nodded slowly, then met his eyes. You let the woman you love erase me, and you stood there quietly as she did. He looked away. I thought it would blow over. That maybe you'd understand. That's the problem, Daniel. My voice didn't rise, but it was firm. You assumed I would always understand. That no matter what I'd stay silent and supportive. But love doesn't mean silence when it matters most. He didn't answer, just stared at the porch railing like it might offer him some escape. I watched you grow from a boy into a man, I said, voice softening. But lately, I'm not sure who you became. I gave you everything I had. Not so you could buy nice suits and stand at fancy weddings, but so you could stand for something. His jaw tightened. I don't know who I am anymore, he admitted. I looked at him, not with anger, but with a long, deep sadness that words couldn't reach. Then I stepped aside and pointed to the path leading away from the house. You have two choices, I said. You can walk away and decide to grow, to become a man who won't stand quietly while someone he loves is being erased. Or you can stay small, chasing approval from people who treat others as disposable. He looked up, lips parted like he wanted to say something, but nothing came out. Not an apology, not a plea, just silence. Finally he nodded once, slowly, and turned. I watched him walk away, the sound of his footsteps fading into the distance like a memory I had finally let go of. I didn't cry. I didn't call after him. I simply whispered, "Goodbye, my boy," and went back inside, back to the life I was finally living for myself. 1 year later, I stood once more at the gates of Roseberry Estate. The roses were still blooming, the lawn still perfectly trimmed, and the sunlight still spilled across the marble steps just so. But this time, there was no wedding music, no white gown, no murmuring crowd, just a woman in her 60s, holding a folder in her hand. I signed the final papers without hesitation. The buyers were eager, an international investor who wanted to turn it into an exclusive event hotel. They paid triple the amount I'd offered 12 months prior. As I signed, I felt nothing but calm. It had served its purpose. I didn't keep all the profit. I never intended to. Not long after, I launched a small foundation in a quiet part of the city, modest but intentional, a resource center for single mothers, those who worked night shifts, skipped meals, and went without so their children could have more. I named it quietly, the Hearth Fund. No press releases, no headlines. Just a hand-painted sign by the door, and a staff that knew what it meant to go without. I visited often in the early months, bringing hot tea or sitting in on budgeting workshops. Sometimes I'd see young mothers come in with tired eyes and children clinging to their skirts, unsure if anyone really saw them. I always smiled, offered them a seat, and said the one thing I knew to be true. You're not invisible here. In the stillness of my new life, something else unexpected bloomed. Leonard had been an old friend once, widowed like me, quiet like me. He'd reached out after seeing my name on a donor list connected to the venue sale. Said he remembered the girl I used to be, back when we'd both worked at the same accounting firm in our 20s. He came by with a basket of lemons and an apology for losing touch. From then on, we found a rhythm. Morning walks under jacaranda trees, slow meals cooked side by side, and evenings filled with shared silence. He never pushed. He never asked about Daniel unless I brought him up. He just showed up, reliably, warmly, without pretense. It wasn't a grand romance. There were no declarations under moonlight. But there was peace. There was partnership. And after so many years of pouring myself out, it was enough to simply feel held. One Saturday morning, I found myself rearranging the bookshelf in my living room. The house smelled of rising bread, and Leonard was outside humming while pruning the lavender. I pulled out an old photo from the back of the drawer. Me in my 30s, sitting cross-legged in the grass with a young Daniel in my lap, his cheeks round and sticky with jam, both of us laughing. I stared at it for a long time. For a moment I remembered the ache, the heartbreak, The crushing realization that love, no matter how unconditional, doesn't always return to you the way you gave it. But I didn't cry. I didn't grieve. Instead, I placed the photo on the top shelf, between a collection of poetry books and a carved wooden elephant I'd picked up during a weekend trip with Leonard. Not to mourn, but to remember. I once gave everything I had to that little boy in my lap. Every hour, every meal, every ounce of safety and comfort. And now, finally, I had given something back to myself. They once said I was too embarrassing to be seen, that I didn't fit the aesthetic. But I know now what they never understood. Dignity doesn't come from expensive dresses or curated photos. It comes from standing tall in the silence, from telling the truth with grace, and from knowing your worth, even when the world tries to erase it. I stepped back, looked at the photograph, then turned toward the kitchen. Leonard was setting 2 plates at the table, humming to the rhythm of a life that at last felt like mine. And this time, I wasn't anyone's shadow. I was simply finally me. If you enjoyed, please subscribe to our channel